everyone. My name is Lynne Bowman from Uppsala University's Transformative Play Initiative. And today we're going to be talking about intimacy and relationships in role-playing games. So role-playing is an inherently co-creative activity where new modes of reality and thus new modes of relating are experienced. Players can experience unprecedented levels of intimacy, vulnerability, and connection. And these experiences can fundamentally shake players' self-concepts and their understanding of relationships. By understanding this, how then do we design these experiences in order to harness this transformational potential? So analog role-playing games, LARP, freeform, tabletop, etc., are inherently relational. Their goals may center upon achieving a goal, feeling empowered, or experiencing strong catharsis when a player starts the game, but RPGs are seldom experienced alone. Therefore, relationships are central parts of design and play, and these relationships can be familial, romantic, sexual, collegial, even antagonistic. And these relationships sometimes can lead to relationships forming outside of play. And also existing relationships can be impacted by play experiences because they are so powerful. So players experience a variety of different ways that they relate. They relate to the designers in the game design. They relate to the community, their co-players, facilitators, different characters interrelate with each other. They also have a relationship between their sense of self and their character, their sense of self and another person's character, their character and another person's character, and then the fictional world and story, which might include the meta plot and the unfolding emergent narrative. So as you can see, this is quite complex with different layers of reality and selfhood functioning at the same time, which gets even more complex when you add other people into the mix. So examining relationships and intimacy can help us not only understand the dynamics in role-playing games, but also the human experience more broadly. And that's what we mean when we talk about transformative play. In general, relationship dynamics in role-playing games are built in with conflict. So we play out roles that are already imbued with conflict in order to increase the drama and the intensity. So common assumptions are that role-playing games without conflict are unplayable or boring. Thus, there's an emphasis on building character relations as crucial to relationship drama. And there's a tendency to write characters that are preloaded with dysfunctional relationship dynamics. And we're going to talk about these transaction or games that are intended to provide some sort of payoff in a moment. And these experiences are often called positive negative experiences, where the players are desiring to experience some sort of powerful emotion or bleed. And we will also discuss that next. Now, there are games that counter this tendency mechanically. And one of my favorite games is Dream Askew by Avery Alder. And in Dream Askew, you actually receive tokens for expressions of intimacy and connection and vulnerability. And then you lose tokens for engaging in strong moves, such as imposing power or violence on another person. So it's a way to facilitate more connection through play. So just really quickly about alibi, role-playing games help create a safer space outside of social norms by giving us this alibi, which gives us permission to act in ways we wouldn't normally. And it allows us to escape the social policing that we might ordinarily be subject to, which is very important in terms of expressions of intimacy and relationship. The alibi is a ritual that allows us to enter another frame, and it gives role players the experience of engaging in a different world, which functions on a different set of principles and rules, being able to shapeshift to experience another way of being or a character, weirding the self, as Janaea Kemper puts it, to experience different types of relationship dynamics, both healthy and dysfunctional. And it can be especially empowering for queer players who explore relationships, sexualities, and gender identities that are taboo in daily life. So just a little bit about bleed. This is very complex and there's lots of different facets, but some of the types of bleed that have been discussed are emotional bleed, involving emotional states and feelings that bleed in and out of the frame, so from player to character and vice versa. Procedural bleed, which refers to physical abilities, traits, and habits. Mimetic bleed, so ideas, thoughts, opinions, convictions, and ideologies. So in the case of emotional bleed, a romantic play might lead to romantic feelings outside of the game. Negative experiences might lead to animosity between players. Procedural bleed, if you're walking and speaking in a sexually confident way, that might be something that you bring out into your daily life. Also, just becoming accustomed to physical affection with another person, that's something that might bleed out into those dynamics outside of the game. And then in terms of mimetic bleed, so values related to monogamy or polyamory, those might replicate within the game, so bringing our ideologies in, or they can shift the worldview of a player after a game. There's also ego bleed, where aspects of personality, identity, and mythic or archetypal contents bleed between the player and character. So these are deeper structures, personality structures, and archetypal structures. So for example, playing a loyal and vulnerable character in a romance might lead a player to express those traits more commonly in their relationships, or self-define as romantic outside of play, where maybe they didn't feel that way before. Emancipatory bleed, where players from marginalized backgrounds experience liberation through their play experiences. They can steer towards these liberatory experiences as a means to challenge structural oppression. An example might be queer players who are openly expressing marginalized genders and sexualities in games, maybe feeling more confident to come out in their daily life. And then there's romantic bleed, which we're going to talk about quite a bit, when players feel romantic and or sexual attraction, or even fall in love with fictional characters and or players after an intense role-playing experience. Or if they bring those things inside to the game, to characters that wouldn't normally feel them. So we're going to go over some psychological theories very quickly. These are mainly psychodynamic, meaning that they refer to parts of the psyche that are relating to others and to themselves. So there's attachment theory by Mary Ainsworth, S.M. Bell, and John Bowlby, which originally focused on child psychology in terms of the attachment that's formed between the primary caregiver and the child. And it was later expanded to discuss adult attachment behavior, which sometimes are influenced by these childhood patterns, but not always. So there's 5 main types of adult attachment. There's secure, which is when people believe their emotional needs will be met consistently by their partner or partners. This is 50% of the population or so. There's anxious preoccupied, people who fear abandonment and require consistent reassurance. There's fearful avoidant attachment, where people fear engulfment, but they crave intimacy at the same time. There's dismissive avoidant, which is when people fear engulfment, but also convince themselves that they do not need love or intimacy, even if that may not actually be true. And then there's disorganized attachment, where people engage in several of these styles. And this is usually a result of extreme trauma, abuse, neglect, that sort of thing, where people are sort of grasping for attachment figures in different ways. And so all of these other categories would be considered insecure attachments. So players can experience different types of attachment in role-playing games outside of the game by learning how to develop secure bonds within the social groups or the individuals within a role-playing community. It's especially important for people with histories of insecure attachment due to harm, neglect, or breaches of trust, because it allows them a lower stakes way to practice relationships in a hopefully more accepting environment. This is called behavioral rehearsal. And then players can experience different types of attachments in games. So they can explore attachment styles within the framework of role-playing game characters and narratives. Again, they can rehearse more nourishing attachment styles, or look at what more dysfunctional attachment styles look like. They can experience insecure attachment styles through dysfunctional dynamics. So then there's transactional analysis, and this was originally developed by psychologist Eric Berne. He wrote a book called Games People Play that became very popular, and it identifies various dysfunctional relationship, quote unquote, transactions as unconscious games people play. And he uses the word game. He's not talking about role playing, he's talking about actual relationships in life. And he emphasizes 3 main ego states that are active at any given one of us at any given time of day, which means we shift in and out of these depending on the interaction. And that's parent, adult, and child. And the focus is developing the adult self, who is autonomous and functional in the present moment, rather than sort of reliving things from the past. Harris expanded upon this. He describes in a book called I'm Okay, You're Okay. He describes the 3 states as the parent, The parent often expresses traits similar to the person's primary caregivers during upbringing. So, we model these behaviors. We have them modeled for us, and then we model them in our day-to-day interactions. So it could be nurturing behavior, which gives permission and security to others to express themselves, or it could be criticizing behavior, which invokes tradition and ideals as a mean to punish a more authoritarian style of parenting. Then there's the adult, the fully conscious and aware ego state that is able to process information, make predictions about emotions, and operate accordingly. And this is the goal, as I mentioned, of transactional analysis, to develop this adult self. The adult has a more objective appraisal of reality and feels empowered within it. And then there's the child, who often expresses characteristics that are similar to their child personality, including their emotional responses, spontaneity, playfulness, creativity, and intimacy. And as we can imagine, child state is probably pretty important when we're role playing, because there's an aspect of playfulness and creativeness about it. So the child can manifest as either natural or free, and that behavior is a result of a nurturing relationship with parental figures where it was safe to express oneself. And then there's adapted behaviors to the demands of the parent, which could include either or and rebellious behavior or feeling pressure to perform the quote unquote good child role. And people may toggle between those two things. So an example of transactional analysis in role-playing games, there's lots, but I decided to focus on Vampire the Masquerade because it's literally baked into the system in the Camarilla faction. So the prince is often the criticizing parent, with each subject either playing a co-parent that that person works with or a child. So you might see natural, free, or adapted rebellious behavior in these games because we're being playful, but that is often punished. The adaptive, quote unquote, good child behavior may be rewarded by this prince or other parental figures in the Camarilla, or their survival may simply be permitted because they haven't broken the rules. So it's a very hierarchical, authoritarian way of rule. Vampires literally sire new vampires and are expected by Camarilla law to play the parent role. And the new vampire is referred to as the child. So this inherently creates that parent-child dynamic. Whether it gets played out that way or not is, varies from case to case. But it becomes more emotionally complex when romantic entanglements exist between the sire and the child, or when they come from the same human family where they have different kinds of relationships. But in my experience, Vampire is as much about relationships as it is about monstrosity or politics. So the drama triangle is a common game that is described in transactional analysis. And this theory of relationships games was developed by Stephen Cartman, and it focuses on dysfunctional relationship dynamics that unfold from three disempowered roles. There's the perpetrator who feels disempowered and they attempt to exert control over others. You can see them here in the top right corner of this triangle, or top left corner. There's the victim who feels disempowered and has difficulty taking meaningful action. That's there on the bottom of the triangle. And then there's the rescuer who also feels disempowered and tries to heal, save, rescue, or fix other people in the triangle. So in role-playing games, this is pretty endemic. The perpetrator, victim, rescuer is part of the hero's journey, and it's inherent to many popular genres, including fantasy, science fiction, superheroes, action films. Science fiction depends, but it can be there as well. Many fantasy games, such as Dungeons and Dragons, are predicated on these dynamics. So heroes rescue victims who cannot defend themselves from villains. And this can be used as an alibi to justify many morally questionable actions. So for example, somebody who thinks they're being the rescuer might engage in acts of perpetration, and that is being performed by quote unquote heroes. And then the game also projects these roles of the triangle upon others. So characters are either other heroes or monstrous others, which are perpetrators, or damsels in distress, or victims, basically. So how can we imagine and co-create more nourishing relationship dynamics through play? There's this empowerment dynamic by David Emerald, which switches the perpetrator to the challenger, the rescuer to the coach, and the victim to the creator. So the idea here is that when we're in our empowered roles, we can show up in ways that also empower other people by shifting these dynamics into more healthy dynamics. And so we can experience these kinds of dynamics in games through our characters by practicing them, or outside of games simply through relationships within the community. So just a little bit about safety, aftercare, and integration. Role-playing, it can be considered a magical practice, meaning something that takes place within an alchemical container. And within this, participants must perceive themselves as psychologically safe within this transformational container. And that can be cultivated through practices of workshopping and debriefing, safety mechanics, codes of conduct, transparent safety protocols, consent negotiations and calibration between players, and aftercare by members of the community. So this perception of safety will decrease mental vigilance, which leads to greater risk-taking and trust within gaming communities. And role-playing usually features a series of emotionally intense experiences that are shared between players over a very short amount of time, which can often decrease this vigilance. So the community can be further structured to facilitate transformation through establishing norms around vulnerability, acceptance, compassion, and care, values of diversity, equity, and inclusion that inform design and the implementation of role-playing games, norms around acknowledging and honoring bleed, especially romantic bleed, but also other types of bleed. And finally, players can engage in integration practices, which can help them with processes of transformation. And these are meant to facilitate reflection, processing, and transfer from the magic circle to daily life. So examples of this include creative expression, intellectual analysis, emotional processing, rituals that help people return to daily life, interpersonal processing, and community building. So I know that was very fast. Here's a glimpse at some of my sources. And just a little reminder that I am Sarah Lynne Bowman from Uppsala University's Department of Game Design and from the Transformative Play Initiative. Thank you very much for your attention.